Over time, I've learned that all innovation, whether it's science, technology, or art, comes from taking someone else's idea and building another on top of it. There's a process I use when formulating an idea or a thought pattern. This process helps tremendously when I am creating music. I hear forms of musical phrases and everything because I'm constantly aware of my musical surroundings, and most people who are musically inclined have the ability to do that. Bassist and 5-time Grammy winner Victor Wooten approaches music the same way we learn any verbal language. I'm a musician as well. I share the same belief as Victor Wooten, and in order to fully grasp this concept, we must view music from a linguistic perspective. We have to understand music as communication to be written or spoken. I think it's important to note that Western music has a universal popularity that fosters bias to the human ear. There are parameters in Western music that lend a pleasantry to listeners. In Western music, there are 12 notes or pitches. Each pitch has a unique characteristic relative to a given key signature. Most people who are born and raised in the Western part of the world would recognize these pitches as normal tones of music. They'd be familiar with melodies and musical phrases that come from this 12-pitch alphabet. Conversely, people who are born and raised in the Eastern or Northern Hemisphere have a different auditory perspective of music. They may be familiar with the Western system, but more so the Eastern sound. The alphabet on the Eastern Hemisphere is larger, the music alphabet is larger with microtonal elements added. So for example, Chinese music draws melodies from the musical alphabet that I can't really identify. The microtones and the complexity that I am not accustomed to is what confuses me. Similar to Chinese music, the language has an interesting phonological structure. The tones are foreign to most Western natives. So as this relates to my topic, the legalities in digital music sampling, copyright infringement, is I just wanted to draw the connection of language and music and how you could communicate the two as far as creativity and intellectual property. Now I want to talk about a concept called fair use. Now, fair use is a doctrine that applies to this topic in a lot of ways. But first, I want to go ahead and define the term fair use. So, fair use is any copying of copyrighted material done for a limited and transformative purpose to comment upon, criticize, or parody a copyrighted work. Fair use is a defense used against a claim of copyright infringement. So if your use qualifies as fair use, then it will not be considered an illegal infringement. So what is transformative use? This term may be ambiguous or vague, and for the most of this semester, we spoke on ambiguity and vagueness. So I thought this would be a great way to pretty much connect it all together. So I think it's important for us to be aware that in the arts, intellectual property is pretty much what the foundation is. Is the foundation. So when it comes to creating musical concepts or musical phrases or expressions, it's important for us to have it down on paper or any type of way to kind of have it down on as a document. So in many cases, there's been instances where an artist, quite often a new artist, would pay a producer to come up with a song or any type of lyrics maybe, and a lot of times that they'll draw inspiration from an older song. And a perfect example is there's a group called Parliament Funkadelic, and there's also a newer group called NWA. At the time, probably in the 90s, they were really popular. So NWA decided to sample a given piece from Parliament Funkadelic. And the issue there was they didn't get the proper permission from Parliament Funkadelic, so they went ahead and they used digital sampling to take a piece of the song, put it together, and there was the issue. Now, as a multi-instrumentalist, it's important for me to scientifically analyze music as if it was a language. As musicians, we communicate by using musical phrases. The same way we dissect words, sentences, and passages over the course of the semester, I dissect songs and solo pieces and other forms of musical expression. We've expounded on phonology, syntax, semantics, and other linguistic genres. Each of these genres applies to the language of music. Through careful legal and linguistic study, I'll thoroughly analyze the idea of digital sampling in music as intellectual property. So earlier I mentioned intellectual property, and as to every art form, in music there are rules. Now the term digital sampling may not be familiar to the average ear. At the same time, it's very likely that you've listened to the radio and you've heard digital sampling. As for clarity, digital sampling is the act of taking a portion of an audio recording and applying it to another song or piece. So the process of digital sampling has grown to be a very, very popular in modern music today. So as technology advances, there are new ways to do this. So this semester we've also spoke about a software called Audacity and Pratt. And with these softwares, audio engineers have the ability to cut and paste and manipulate sound recordings, audio recordings, and we've talked about it with forensic phonetics, but you can do the same thing when it comes to digital sampling. And personally, I've used a lot of different other software such as Logic, Reason, Ableton Live, and a couple others, but they have the same features as Audacity and Pratt, where you can cut and paste and manipulate sound. So quite often, music producers and musical artists, they do this to kind of mask a sound that they've taken from another artist. So pretty much that's another way of using fair use as a defense. So a lot of times judges, they use these 4 factors to resolve fair use disputes. And the 4 factors are if the purpose and the character of the use is in fair taste, if the nature of the copyrighted work is in fair taste, and the amount and substantiality of the portion taken is in fair taste, and if the effect of the use upon the potential market is in fair taste. So as far as fair use, it's important for producers to really think about the amount of the portion that they're going to take. Now, if you're going to take a large portion of the song, then obviously the fair use doctrine is not going to apply to your defense because it's not, you can't just take a large portion of the song and call it your own. However, if you take a small portion, then you can go ahead and use that as a defense. But also at the same time, you have to use your discretion. Like for example, a famous musical artist by the name of Marvin Gaye, he has a song called "Let's Get It On." Now, a lot of people are familiar with that song because, in the very beginning, he says, "Let's get it on." So if somebody wants to take that sound bite and apply it to their own new musical work, although it's only 4 words, let's get it on. Although it's only 4 words, it's 4 words that everybody's familiar with, so the fair use doctrine wouldn't apply there. So, we're here with Mike Payne. He's a grad student. He has some intellect on music technology and some of the software and programs that you use to sample music. And I just wanted to ask him his experiences and all that type of stuff. So,
well, I teach the Introduction to Music Technology class at GSU. Well, I've taught it this past year, and
okay.
one of the courses is on is a project called the Plunderphonics Project.
Okay.
And the Plunderphonics is a term that was coined by John Oswald in the 80s. Basically, he took one of his pieces. He took a bunch of James Brown songs and spliced them together with tape and forged them together again.
Right.
And made his own piece called Brown, I think it was called. So it's a new piece, but made from a ton of other pieces as well.
Right.
So I guess the question is that original music, or
Right.
is it someone else's work? But it didn't exist before, but it came from existing materials. So that project, we take a bunch of different audio stems from different pop songs over the last 10 years. The drums, the bass, keys, guitar, and the idea is to put them together and make them into a piece. Now, I guess the issue is, when is that wrong?
Exactly.
You know?
Right. Exactly.
So if I take a piece that you have made and I change a couple of things to it and I release it and I make 3 times the amount of money and fame that you have,
Right.
I'm probably in the wrong there because I've only changed a couple of things. But how far do you have to change something
Absolutely.
until it's a new piece? Like, you look at R&B and hip hop from like the 80s, 70s,
Right.
when it was all sampling.
Exactly. And there's a doctrine called the fair use doctrine where pretty much you can pretty much take a little bit of someone's musical piece and use it as your own. And that little bit can be 2 seconds, but at the same time, it could be the most important 2 seconds of the
Yeah.
song, as
Right.
opposed to, and there are times where some artists, they take a lot from, an original piece, and still they may get away with it. You know what I'm
Right,
saying?
right.
So it's a large playing field, but like you said, where do you draw the line? And some of the stuff, some of the technology that they use today is, it's pretty interesting. There's different ways you can cut and paste and, manipulate different sounds and kind of mask, what you're trying to do. So talk about some of the programs that you've experienced, some of the stuff that you use. Or
We use Pro Tools here.
Okay.
I learned using Logic,
Right.
which I think you said you use.
Right.
So they're the two that I know the most. I probably know more of Pro Tools now after teaching it and things, but just using it shows how frighteningly easy it is to take music and things. Especially with the internet now, you can download music, MP3s from YouTube, things like that, where it's hosted for free for people to use. You throw it into Pro Tools and you can manipulate it in any ways that you want, really, as long as you know how to use it.
Absolutely.
So, but Pro Tools, Logic, all of those things, they have the tools available that make cutting pieces of music out, adding things in a lot easier than it was, like I say, back in the 80s, when they used tape, actual physical tape, and cut it and pasted it back together, like physically instead of digitally.
Right. Yeah, totally understand. Well, that's great. I definitely want to get that perspective and apply it to my project, and just to show how important it is for producers and musicians to be aware of the legalities and the parameters. So when you want to create something, what not to do.
Right.
So
It's like you say, back in the 80s and 70s, when hip-hop artists and R&B artists were taking older songs and taking like the drum beats from that, or the bass from that, and then rapping over it and things like that. Like, is that wrong? Is that right? Like, some of those songs have come out to be some of the greatest like R&B hip-hop samples that are used now.
Right. Absolutely. But thank you for your intellect and sharing some of the stuff that and much appreciated.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thanks.
Digital sampling and how it relates to copyright infringement. And here I have
Dr. John Thompson. I'm the head of the music technology program at Georgia Southern University.
Okay, cool. So first, I'd like to ask you just briefly describe the process in digital sampling, your experiences with it, and how it could relate to copyright infringement.
Okay, so what do you mean by the process?
Now, for my experiences, I know a lot of artists, they like to take some small pieces of a given musical piece and use it as a tool to create something of their own.
Sure.
So I know I'm a musician and I do some producing myself, and I use some software like Logic and Pro Tools,
Mhm.
and I just want to see your perspective on how someone can create something with technology, and how they can create it as their own.
Well, I guess it goes back a long way,
Okay.
right? So the reason, when you talk about the process, you're talking about digital sampling.
Right.
But the idea of sampling goes back a lot further than that. So maybe the printing press is the original technology that made it easy to borrow from others. They
Right.
write down their musical ideas, and it's freely distributed, and then people are able to use those ideas in their music.
Right.
So in acoustic music, sheet music, I know that George Crumb had some publication issues with his music because he would quote Debussy. So you're talking about sheet music. It's not
Right.
even recorded music at that point.
Right.
So with sampling, you have to deal with a few different elements of copyright, because sampling, as we're talking about it with Pro Tools, deals with actually taking recorded audio, copying it, and putting it into your own music, which is copyright of the recorded music. But there's also copyright of the music itself in an abstract sense of the song itself. So for instance, in recent cases with Marvin Gaye, for instance, it's not so much that the recording was stolen or borrowed or used. It was that the song itself sounds too similar. Even if you recorded it with different instrumentation, it is still that song in the abstract sense. Kind of like taking the notes off the sheet music and putting it into your own sheet music. So there's that type of copyright too. So two different things. And if you were going to if you wanted to do it the legal way, you'd have to get the rights to both the recorded music, so the tape holder you would have to contact, the person that owns the master tapes. Or you'd also have to contact the person that owns the song, the publisher. And
Right.
then there's a third one as well. If you were doing a commercial for Volkswagen or something like that,
Right.
you'd have to get the permission of the artist themselves, because you were then using their artistic image in some way to promote a product. So there's all these different issues of copyright, but I guess what I'm saying is that there's the written aspect of the music and then there's the recorded aspect. So if we're
Right.
talking about the recorded aspect of the music, obviously that's gotten a lot easier with digital technologies.
Right.
But before digital technologies, there were the analog technologies of tape.
That's right.
So it used to be that people would pass around tapes and you would copy somebody's tape. And, the recording industry wasn't trying to crack down on that, because what you would end up getting is a not perfect copy. So
Right.
if I recorded that tape enough times, eventually it would be unlistenable. So you would pay for the premium copy because it sounded better.
Right.
I would copy things off the radio as a kid.
Me too.
And it would sound okay to me, but it wasn't getting the polished copy.
Right.
And so a guy named John Oswald did that. He did this series of things called plunderphonics, where he took recorded tapes and assembled them together on tape, other people's music in a new form. And that was copyright infringement, unless you want to talk about the ways you can get around copyright infringement. Like, was that a transformative work that John Oswald did with plunderphonics? That would be maybe fair use.
Right.
Although fair use is really ill-defined.
Exactly. It can be very vague or ambiguous.
It's written in an ambiguous way.
Right.
But the copyright, the reason it exists in the first place is not ambiguous. And I think that's kind of where the conflict has come in. Is that what is the purpose of copyright? And if you ask most people, I think they would say, well, it's to protect people's investments, their money. But that's not why copyright is actually in our Constitution, which is where it comes from.
Right.
It is there to promote the progress of useful arts or sciences and useful arts. So the question and the idea, right, is that if I take a piece of music you wrote and then I record it and say I wrote it, well, that's not fair. And that would mean that everyone would make their money by stealing other people's songs and calling them their own.
Right.
And that doesn't help progress. So that's the reason copyright exists. However, I think the way that sampling has been used has been promoting the arts toward progress. There are whole genres of music that rely on transforming already recorded work into a new context.
Absolutely.
So dance music like jungle is entirely based on one breakbeat.
Right.
for which no one ever got copyright. They never got any money back from it. The Winston brothers never got any money back from their almond breakbeat, which was used to spawn a whole genre of music.
Right.
And in hip hop, that whole genre of music has been the result of
Exactly.
taking those samples and manipulating them or using them in their music. And no one would think, I don't think in most of hip hop or jungle, that they're trying to take a breakbeat and say that that's their song. They're trying to make a new thing out of it, a transformative thing. And then there's parody and
Absolutely.
things like that. But I don't think we should limit sampling or copyright legalities to whether something is critical or a parody. I don't understand why it can't just be something new that maybe comments upon culture. So for instance, to take Disney, which in some sense belongs to us all because it permeates American culture and
Right.
world culture to a certain extent.
Right.
To take Disney as something that is part of my experience as a kid growing up,
Right.
as an adult with kids, and to say those cultural artifacts are not mine seems not right. How do
Right.
I then comment upon my culture without being able to use the cultural artifacts
Exactly.
produced? And Disney would argue that I'm going to hurt their marketability.
Right.
And so it becomes about commercialism over progress of the arts.
Right.
And that's the conflict.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. And like you said, just from my perspective, because I'm a musician, and the difference between when a musician creates music as opposed to a producer may not be able to say the things that a musician says with his instrument. So a producer quite often, relies on sampling or may even hire musicians. So from my perspective, I feel like I'm always torn between, when is it too much? You know what I'm saying? As far as fair use. Now, I understand that you can take a little bit of a song, and that little bit can be the heartbeat of the song. And you know what I'm saying? And then you can, that's clearly, copying somebody. As opposed to, you can take the entire piece of a song or like a section, like a chorus, and it could be a song that nobody is really familiar with, and you can get away with it that way.
Sure.
But my question to you is, if you were to put yourself in the perspective of a musician, where do you draw the line? As far as what's too much, or what's too little, or
Well, I guess everyone appreciates recognition.
Right.
And everybody appreciates that at some point it costs somebody some money to make a recording in the first place. So if 10 years ago I'd gone in a studio, paid for that studio, and constructed these sounds myself with my instrument or otherwise, I would be feeling trod upon if someone were to take my music that I worked to get those good timbres from and then just use that in its entirety to create their own song. I would feel a little bit like, I worked hard on that and it actually cost me money.
Right.
Where's my cut of you using my time and my effort and my money for your purposes?
Right.
I would feel that way. However, we have to question whether the existence of copyright law is there to make me feel as though I'm being recognized or compensated for that. I'm not sure that that's necessary.
Right.
I put the work out there in the world, right? It
Right.
became part of the world, and therefore maybe I can't complain when someone uses it.
Right.
I understand both sides of the argument. I would err on the side of let's promote progress in music
Right.
toward creative ends. I think if someone's claiming that the song I wrote is their song, I draw the line.
Right.
That it's not your song, it's mine.
Exactly.
But in the case of the most recent of things with Blurred Lines,
Exactly.
Marvin Gaye, it's obvious to me that that is not Marvin Gaye's song.
Right.
Marvin Gaye did not write Blurred Lines. It sounds a lot like some of his earlier stuff. And that's, where do you draw the line with that? If anybody sounds like anybody else now, we sue them.
Right.
It seems to not be at all like what music is. Music
Right.
is definitely sounding like other people,
Right.
to have a lineage, to have an aesthetic. And I think limiting the aesthetic of music is probably not a good idea, even though it might make the most money And we see that a lot in pop music, that when things sound exactly the same, it tends to make some money.
Right.
But I'm not interested in that aspect of music above all else.
Right.
That's what it boils down to. It's a commercial venture.
Right. Yeah, I definitely understand, and I don't want to piggyback off of something you said. Now, sounding like somebody. Now, I like to make the connection of music as a language. Now, you can pretty much connect it as English. Now, growing up, when I learned English, I copied my parents, how they said things.
Mhm.
I copied my brother, my sister. So that's what my understanding of English was. So the same way I learned music is when I grew up, I listened to songs, I listened to records, listened to the radio, and I can recall now if I'm playing a bass line or a riff, it's because it was inspired, it was put in me when I was a child. So that's where my vocabulary comes from. That's how I speak when it comes to music.
Right.
So I completely understand, like, if someone's creating something and it may seem like they copied somebody, but it's just their perspective of what they heard a while ago. It could be something like that. So the line, is, it's pretty much another question, like, when it comes to legislation and when it comes to, the laws of it, an entertainment law, it's kind of, it's funny because it's hard to understand or put it in like a box, because when it comes to creativity, you're not supposed to be put in a box. So
Mhm.
it's like it's a funny subject. But
Yeah, John Oswald says if creativity is the field, copyright is the fence.
Right.
Wow.
Wow. There you go.
So there you go. But I would say there's nothing new under the sun. You can't actually make anything new.
Right.
It doesn't exist in music. As far out as you could go, it's not going to be new. There's a lot of people in the world making music.
Right.
And I think it all goes back to what do you think the purpose of copyright is? Is it to protect people's assets, or is it to protect the art itself?
Right.
And if you go with the latter, then I think you can get around a lot of these talking points.
Right.
If it's about saving people money, then it's not about music.
Right. Exactly. And lastly, you mentioned that some artists may feel, or some musicians may feel that if they record something for a producer, they may understand it as, okay, I recorded it, it's out there. They may not feel compelled to, take legal action, if it goes that far. A perfect example of that is, I know you're familiar with James Brown.
Yep.
And his drummer, he's on a lot of records when it comes to James Brown, obviously.
Mhm.
And today, hip-hop music, they sample a lot from the older funk records.
Yeah, funky drummer.
Exactly, funky drummer. So he's all over the place. He's in people's, radios, but he doesn't. His idea is pretty much, it's out there. What I'm saying? At the time, that's how he felt. That's how he expressed himself, and he doesn't really take too much offense to it. He doesn't, as far as the legal aspect, he'd much rather just stay away from it. So I definitely understand his point of view, and I respect it, because it's art at the end of the day.
I think most artists are not the ones pursuing this.
Right.
For example, it was Dr. Dre in Parliament.
Right.
So the group Parliament Funkadelic, George Clinton in
Mhm.
particular, said, I don't have a problem with this, but who had the problem with it are the people that make money off of that music. The people that aren't the musicians themselves,
Right.
lawyers and record executives, had an issue. And so that's why it went to court. So between artists, I think once you understand you put something beautiful out in the world, then why wouldn't you want it to populate
Right.
and spread? But for people that are running the business, they have different interests.
Right.
And they've taken copyright and run with it as a money-making venture.
Right. Absolutely. But I feel like that concludes, this discussion. Definitely thank you for your time.
Well, thanks for talking to me. It's always a
Absolutely.
fun conversation.
All right.